Hey guys, how you doing? It's Amy here with this fourth video in the Restarts week of Life Words. Today we are looking at Joshua chapter 2 and Joshua chapter 6, looking at how Joshua leads God's people in the taking of the city of Jericho. So we've been on a bit of a journey this week. We started with Moses and the Ten Commandments, and here we see Joshua leading God's people as a new leader into the promised land. Now in Joshua chapter 2, we see Joshua send two spies into Jericho to have a look at the city they're going to take. They go into the city, the two spies, and they find protection in the house of Rahab. Rahab is a prostitute. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't think this wouldn't have been the first pick for God's people trying to live holy lives, and yet this is who God leads them to. A woman who tells these two men of the fear in Jericho of God's people, the Israelites. A woman who, in exchange for keeping them from the guards, asks that her family be remembered when God's people take the city of Jericho. A woman who, although she doesn't know much about the God the Israelites follow, wants to know more. She's willing to risk her life to be part of God's people when their victory comes. And so the spies make Rahab a promise. When God's people take Jericho, her and her family will be kept safe. They see something in her faith, in a God she doesn't know much about but wants to give her life for. Would she have been your first choice for someone to seek protection in? One of the things I love about the Old Testament in particular is where we see these fascinating picks, these people who the story continues through. Rahab the prostitute becomes an essential part in the story of God's giving of this promised land to the Israelites. A character probably written off by many, but here held in the timeline of God's family. So what happens? The men eventually sneak out of the city, out of a rope, out of Rahab's house. They go back, they give a favourable report to Joshua. The people are terrified. We can do this. And then in Joshua 6, we see Joshua lead the people in taking Jericho. This doesn't happen in any sort of usual way. In fact, a siege has probably never happened like this since in history. You see, God tells Joshua, tell the people, you're going to walk around the city walls of Jericho once for 6 days. So on Monday you're going to walk around, on Tuesday you're going to walk around, on Wednesday, etc, etc. And then on the 7th day, you're not going to walk around the city once, you're going to walk around the city 7 times. And then you're going to have people at the front blow their trumpets and the walls of Jericho will tumble down. What happens? It doesn't really make sense. It's not a huge military victory in the sense of the usual means, but it happens and it works. The walls fall down, the Israelites take the city, Rahab and her family are left alive, they become part of the family of God. What might there be for us today in the midst of these strange stories? Well, we gotta be willing to trust God's instructions. Joshua and the Israelites were prepared to look ridiculous. I'm sure the people in Jericho were shouting abuse at them as they walked around, but they stuck by God's instructions. And when they followed it, then they were able to achieve what they needed to achieve. Are you prepared to walk differently from those around you? When God gives you an instruction, are you willing to see it through? Or will you give in and want to do things the way the world wants to do it? I also love in this story that Rahab has such a central part. A woman who would be condemned, isolated, written off, a woman of perhaps shaky character, yet she's heard something about this God of the Israelites. She wants to know more. She has faith in the God of the Israelites, even though she doesn't yet know much about him. She's willing to offer, at great risk to herself, help to these two spies. Who are the people that we sometimes overlook? Could they be people that help us know more about who God is? Could they aid us in our own relationship with Jesus? How do we need to see people the way that God sees them? Not by their mistakes, not by their reputations, but instead as his potential children with purpose, part of the promise, not too far away from God's love. What task is God giving you today? Who might he be calling you to protect? Where might you need to trust in him and follow his instructions? And where, when things might seem impossible, it must have seemed impossible to Joshua that they would somehow manage to take the city of Jericho, to step into the promises that God had made them. Where do we need to believe that the God who does the impossible is with us today? the one who nothing is impossible for whom there is nothing too big or too small, a God who cares, a God who is close, and a God who wants to lead us further than what we think we can go. Why not check out the passages for yourself? Join Kwaku and me tomorrow as we look at Life Words Unpacked on Instagram Live at 4 o'clock. Drop us your questions. We can't wait to talk about it more with you. I hope you've loved this week of restarts. I know I have. See you again soon. Bye now.